you can be way too open. If you don't learn how to shut it off, it's possible that you are constantly being bombarded with them trying to speak to someone who is alive. All the voices are coming at you one time. That's crazy, man. That's dangerous.
This is an emergency broadcast. This is not a test.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. This week is Halloween, as you may know, if you celebrate. And we thought, what better thing to kick us off than a paranormal episode where we dive into hauntings, poltergeist activity, possessions, to see what's real and what is not before the big day. Today's guest is Loyd Auerbach. He is a world-recognized parapsychologist with over 45 years of experience and thousands of media appearances. He's director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, president of the Forever Family Foundation, and president of the board of the Ryan Research Center, where he's taught parapsychology for decades. He's written 9 books for the public, including ESP, Hauntings, and Poltergeist, a paranormal casebook, and ESP Wars, East versus West. And you may have also seen him on The Unexplained, Surviving Death, and much more. Today, we're cutting through the Hollywood myths to find out what actually happens in real cases. We also look at one of Loyd's favorite cases that made him believe that this phenomenon is 100% real. If you would like early access to episodes, photos and evidence of cases we're looking into, and be able to ask questions of upcoming guests, please consider becoming a member on YouTube. And if you're new or you just haven't done so yet because we're all busy, please like and subscribe, as this genuinely helps the show reach more people, helps us book more guests. We would like the Dad's Doomsday Guide to become the hub for paranormal, high strangeness, and survival content. And with your help, we can do that. All right, let's jump into the interview. I hope you guys enjoy it. Welcome, Loyd. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. For people who don't know you, and I started looking into your background, and you really have just quite the career. Can you explain to people how you came to be studying the paranormal? I know you kind of have some mentalist background, magician work. Kind of how did you form all those things and get to the point where you're kind of looking into parapsychology and the paranormal?
Well, actually, the mentalist and magician stuff didn't start until graduate school. So I really got interested in parapsychology as a kid, partly because of TV, comic books, science fiction, things like that. And then discovering, probably when I was about 12 or 13, that there were actually science books on parapsychology. Found them in the library, and that just set me on a path because I found it really interesting that people have had these experiences. And even though I was very much into science as a kid and still am, it just baffled me why these experiences were being ignored or downplayed by mainstream science so much. I mean, too many people had the experiences, and there were no good explanations for them overall. So it was kind of a mystery and just kind of enticed me into the field. And I lucked out time-wise to actually find that there was a graduate parapsychology program at the time that I was ready for a master's program. So I kind of moved into the field that way.
How did you get your first experience? Because a lot of people have, I mean, you can go out and probably investigate your own, but to get kind of like a caseload to where you're getting credible cases, how did that come about?
Well, one of the first courses I took at JFK University in the graduate parapsychology program was an investigations course. Basically, it was one of our research methods series that we had. And the university had this program for a couple of years. So they were getting, the program was getting cases coming in. And having that class, if the case came in, we were assigned as students to go and do the investigation, under supervision pretty much.
When you talk about investigative work, and I kind of even touched on a little bit then, is like in terms of mainstream science, not looking at this seriously. I've always been really frustrated by that, and not because I'm a huge believer. I feel like I'm someone kind of like a seeker. I'm trying to find the evidence, but I'm not shut off to it. And you feel like so many mainstream scientists are shut off to it. They won't even entertain it. They kind of downplay it. What was the best, if you had to steelman that side, what's the best argument for them to have that attitude? Because to me, not even looking at it, you don't even have to invoke God, which I feel like it's kind of an anti-religion thing maybe.
Right.
What do you feel is the, I guess, most credible reason they would be resistant to it still?
Well, I think it's all belief. It is holding on to a materialist perspective. And they've been told a lot of times, especially since the 1970s with the rise of the organized skeptics movement, the folks that have been, and they've kind of, that group has wormed their way into academia, made it, in many respects, unpopular or even unsafe to talk about these experiences, or even an interest some universities and some places, mainly in the U.S. It's a little bit different in different countries, but it's really a belief thing. Back in 2011, one of my colleagues, Daryl Bem, who's a well-known social psychologist at Cornell, had finished a 2-year study on precognition in the laboratory. Looking at whether students could, or people could actually feel if their bodies would react before a stimulus is shown, if something would actually get them going. And when the mainstream psychology journal published their list of, contents of what's the upcoming journal, and they included a note of, that his paper was going to be published in that, there was this huge backlash against the journal and against BEM in general. Like, how dare you do something that's pseudoscience? How dare you do this? And there were some journalists who were smart enough to ask a question of these people who were really complaining so much in different sciences. One of the main question was, have you read the paper? Do you even know what the results are? Because the results could have been in their favor, basically supporting that there's no precognition. And the answer to that is no, why would I? So, Arthur C. Clarke made some comment years ago that if an elderly, but I can't remember the exact quote phrase, knowledgeable scientist says that something in one field says that something is impossible, it is almost certainly not impossible, because science is not a set, is not a frozen body of knowledge. We learn more and more. In fact, we know so little about the brain when it comes right down to it, that when people make assumptions about consciousness in the brain, we don't know enough about the brain to say that that's what's really going on.
So would you say people are afraid? And on top of, I'm curious, people are worried about getting punished in those fields or being ostracized.
Yeah.
By who is doing that? Who is at the top of that food chain that's making that culture?
It's usually their colleagues who have total disbelief, who are dismissive. But the weird thing is, and this is something I've experienced a little bit. I know Dean Radin, who's in parapsychology, who's one of our researchers and written a lot about a variety of things, has experienced this a lot. He's gone to a variety of scientific conferences. My colleague Ed May, same thing. He's a physicist who actually ran the Stargate program, the remote viewing program, for over 10 years.
Oh, cool.
You run into these various scientists in different fields. And in a group, they will just simply dismiss all this, say you're crazy, but they'll say it's not possible. They'll dismiss it as just very negatively. And then several of them, when they get you alone, will tell you about their psychic experience or ghostly experience. It's this peer pressure thing. I know someone who was teaching psychology at a university in Florida for many years. He was an adjunct professor. And he was also doing investigations, and research on the side. Nothing to do with the university, never once connected it to the university. And he got fired. And the letter he got basically said, because of your work in parapsychology. And I tried my best to get him to sue, because he had a really good case for wrongful termination in that instance.
That's terrible. And that does explain it. I mean, that's us outside of academia. You think you have that hunch and you kind of hear about that, but to hear the inner workings, I mean, it's such, I don't know. It's very unfortunate, because I feel like it is almost a religion when they come out there and the celebrity scientists will come out there and they just kind of downplay all this stuff and make you feel like you're some kind of quack for even entertaining it. And then you kind of get, maybe, because I'm not doing research. So then I think like, well, okay. So I'm like ping pong back and forth between there's evidence and then there's not evidence. And then you go, it's discouraging. To get into some of the evidence, I know I was watching some of your videos and you were breaking down from ghosts to apparitions to poltergeists, and you kind of had some working definitions for those things where a lot of people just kind of combine it all together and it's interchangeable and it doesn't all kind of means the same thing. Can you quickly just go through what are those and how do they differ?
Sure. And we're talking about things like the spooky stuff, pretty much. When we look at the actual, what the behavior is and what the possible thing behind it might be, we come to three main categories. And one of them is apparition, which is the term that's been used since the 1800s, late 1800s, for consciousness surviving the death of the body. So what people often think of as a ghost, a spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it. The word ghost, unfortunately, in different cultures, even using it in English, you find different people have different ideas. So we tend to use the word apparition because it's a little bit cleaner. And then people ask what that means. So there we're talking about people after death, although you can have apparitions of living people too, in some respects. And then there are what are called hauntings. And I think they do the reality TV shows are not great in a lot of ways. But one of the things they did do is give a sort of definition to this idea of what a haunting is. And that's what they call a residual haunting. We just use the word haunting for that. The idea is that human activity, and sometimes other kinds of activity, the information about that activity is somehow recorded in the environment. And some people, many people sometimes, can pick that up, and it gets kind of a playback in our heads, in our perceptions. So think of it as a recording of human activity, and then some people who are sensitive enough, it gets added to our normal perceptions, and we might think we're seeing a ghost or a figure doing the same thing over and over again. These are the things where the ghost seems to be doing things in repeated pattern. Like every night there is footsteps down the hall. I like to say, well, every night at midnight on this castle in Scotland, the old lord of the manor who died 100 years ago plays his bagpipes. And if you waited for that to happen on the parapet, and the figure is approaching you, and you tried to ask him a question, like, do you take requests? And he stops and just reacts to you, that would indicate a conscious entity, like, somebody who's conscious. But if he keeps going, like a recording, because we can interact with videotape, right? Video recordings, the same way. Well, I guess with AI, you probably could now,
Yeah.
but that is a recording. The other thing about hauntings that's really important, even the folks in the paranormal ghost hunting world don't even think about this, is that these recordings, these environmental things, can be just purely emotional. Most people have experienced, anytime they've gone house hunting or apartment hunting, you've probably experienced something where you walked into a place and said, ooh, this doesn't feel good, or this feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
You may be picking up on the emotions of the people who are living there.
I've definitely had that happen before.
Yeah, I mean, it's something almost everybody experiences, and that's same kind of thing. It's just not more than emotional information. Otherwise, living people leave impressions behind. Hauntings have nothing to do with the dead any more than a movie from the 1930s has anything to do with dead actors. They were alive when they made the recording. We can still watch it. That's a haunting. So we have hauntings sometimes of living people. In fact, I've had a couple of people over the years tell me that they were freaking out because they got home. And in one case in particular, the guy said he came into his house and it was after dark. He came home from work and he starts turning on the lights and he sees down a darkened hallway a figure, and he thinks there's somebody who was an intruder. But as the figure came closer to them, he recognized himself. And that freaked him out more than probably any other ghost or even intruder might have done. So the term poltergeist goes back at least as far as the 16th century in Germany. And it was applied for a particular type of what they thought was supernatural activity. Remember, this is 16th century, the 1500s, no real science, no real questioning what it was. Religion was much more common then, much more impactful. And the idea was, in most ghost cases or apparition cases, people see somebody or hear a voice or something like that. And there's almost never any physical activity. Poltergeist phenomena is about generally purely physical activity. Nobody sees or experiences an entity, although there are a couple of exceptions to that for good reason, but it's physical activity. And in what we have learned in the 20th century is that there's typically a living person, an epicenter, a living agent who is at the center of the physical activity that's unexplained. And usually that person is responsible for it, even though they're unaware that they're responsible for it. So we all have this ability kind of to some extent called psychokinesis or mind over matter. And under certain conditions, certain people, the stress, it's usually emotional, psychological stress, or there's a segment of poltergeist agents that are neurologically bound. It's connected to something else in the brain. But they kind of think of it as blowing off steam, a telekinetic temper tantrum, kind of like in the movie Carrie that was out there years ago.
Yeah.
But it's their unconscious that's doing that. And usually it's because they have something going on and they have no other outlet to blow off steam. This is the one phenomena that we know involves living people. because we've been able to often identify who that person is and changing the situation for them, helping them relieve stress through counseling or through other means, like blowing off steam a different way, stops the phenomena. So we can say that we have done the scientific method and hypothesis tested of who it is, why it's happening, providing some outlets, and the phenomena stops.
That's interesting because you're tying a couple things like the memories of high emotion. I've read in psychology before that if you have a high emotional event, those are likely to be memories in the past, things you can latch onto. But now you're talking about kind of this kind of phenomenon wrapped up in these hauntings with ghosts coming back and replaying if there's a highly charged emotional event, maybe in the past, walking in the homes and feeling that energy based on people who lived there before. Out of all those, which ones do you see the most negative or quote unquote, what would be described as demonic, where it tends to be more malicious toward the people? Do you see those more in poltergeist cases, or are those coming across in different variations across all those?
It's pretty rare for anyone in a poltergeist case to get hit by the objects, but it's pretty scary for people if they're unfamiliar with stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and that demonic label comes from the TV folks more than anything else. We don't use that label at all. That implies some religious concepts that make no sense in science in general. But the question we look at is it harmful? So, so in hauntings, you can have a murder was committed, a horrible murder or something else was committed in this place, and you're not even aware of it. And all of a sudden, you're feeling the emotion. You're maybe even feeling like being the victim in that because you're picking up that information. I think that tends to be more impactful for folks than any of the other phenomena at all. With apparitions, though, there's so much, and hauntings and poltergeists, there's so much pop culture stuff and religious stuff that people freak out. And it's really their fear that is causing the problem, not the actual phenomena itself.
About like the label demonic. Now, we've talked to various, obviously, Catholic exorcists who have the religious framework, and they'll frame it as there's entities out there, especially when you talk about getting into Ouija boards and mediums and whatever your occult practices, you're trying to contact things. You don't know what you're contacting. You should be careful. And then you talk to people who are kind of coming at it from an agnostic or non-religious point of view, like yourself and others who I've talked to, and they tend to have a more positive view of that experience and what you're able to do. Now, for me, in the middle, I was raised Catholic. I still am Catholic, but I do wonder, because you have on one hand over here these good experiences or people in contact with people who have passed away, and then you have other ones where it's like, hey, be careful, you don't know what's pretending to be who. So when you look at that, are there instances where if you remove the demonic label and you talk about maybe horrible acts in the past and people, are the people involved, hauntings or apparitions or ghosts, are they able to do malicious things to people? And is that being confused with, hey, this is a demonic entity, and a fallen angel and all that stuff? Do you see some of that? And is it just a label thing now that we're talking about?
It really is just a label thing because it's really rare in apparition cases for physical activity to actually happen. But you can feel... we're all a little bit psychic. I mean, you could not see an apparition unless you were not a little bit psychic, because apparitions are not optical phenomena. You couldn't hear the apparition's voice because it's not an optical thing. So think of it as there's a connection between that apparition's mind and your mind. It's kind of a broadcast signal you're picking up. So if the apparition was a bully in life, let's say, and is hanging around for whatever reason because they feel like they still got to get out what they were doing as a bully, there can be some psychological ramifications. I've had cases where people felt harassed by the ghost, not physically, but otherwise, verbally and otherwise. I had a peeping Tom case where the ghost appeared in the shower of this woman and her daughter. So, living people do evil things too, and I can or bad things too, and I would say that would fall into that category. Not everybody reacts the same way to that. In that peeping Tom case, first they got scared, but then they got mad. So, which I think is a really good, healthy way to go. On the other side, there's you look cross-culturally at any of these phenomena, whether it's apparition, hauntings, poltergeists, whether it's ESP experiences. different religions, different cultures look at the experiences very, very differently. And I've gotten referrals from Catholic priests, and had one case years ago where the priest identified that it was a poltergeist case. And the family wanted like an exorcism. The priest says, no, I'm going to send you to a parapsychologist because this is out of this is in his realm at that point.
Mm.
So you find that there are people within various religions, including the Catholic Church. I mean, the Jesuits themselves will question the whole idea of demonic possession in many respects. You have to approach these things as what else could it be? And as soon as you say the devil's responsible, all bets are off.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe in the devil. I mean, I grew up in Reformed Judaism. No devil, no hell. The entities you have to worry about are angels, because they're the ones who are going to smite you with flaming swords and turn you into salt. So it's not like a lot of us worry about that. So I'm not even religious at this point. The only thing I'd worry about is running into a Sith Lord or something like that. Yeah, any of these things can be harmful if you allow them to be harmful, if you put that label and make the assumption. And I also want to say that many, many of the cases we've investigated where people felt really scared, what we found was nothing paranormal at all, but other explanations that were pretty normal. But because they were so into believing this stuff, whether it's religious or pop culture, they interpreted it as demonic.
So when you look at these cases that maybe have malicious tendencies, you would prescribe them to, because you always hear about the two, like if there's a horrible serial killer or like a horrible event that happened in a home, that energy being left over, and then that you going in there, and now you're like, if it was a home where, what is it, Amityville? There was like where the guy killed his family or whatever. I forget what the cases were. Yeah. Now, can something like that, evil in life, evil in the afterlife, then mess with you? And to what extent have you seen that? I mean, if it's not personal cases, but cases that people you've known, where's the boundary there in terms of what they can and can't do to you? And I'm sure you're going through, every single layer of, hey, this isn't psychological. This isn't their own poltergeist activity of someone in the home kind of having like a problem. Is it a very small percentage actually where you get to that point where, hey, this is something bad?
Well, I think that with hauntings, you have the good and you have the bad, because you have good human activity, you have bad human activity, you have neutral human activity, and high emotion, including things like murders and stuff like that, do leave an imprint behind. And that can be impactful in a negative way. Think about, people go to horror films to be scared, right? And they'll go to slasher films to be scared or thrilled. If you suddenly found yourself in one of those and not realize it was a recording or was a movie being made, it could be significantly traumatic. And so, as an example, and the thing is that you can pick up various things. I had a situation with a couple of my students, actually. One, and this is back when I was doing some live classes here in the Bay Area, and I also had a speakerphone and had people just doing distance learning by listening to the lectures at that point. And one of my students told me she had just gotten back from Montreal, and she was in this hotel that had a reputation of being haunted. She didn't know what room it was, but she was in this room and woken up in the middle of the night. It felt like somebody had jumped her in bed and was trying to attack her, sexually attack her. So she got up. She didn't see anybody. She woke up. She went down to the night manager, said, "What's going on in that room? Here's what I experienced." And the guy said, "Oh yeah, we shouldn't have put you in the haunted room." There was a man who broke into a woman's to that room a few years ago and attacked a woman sexually, and he's in jail. So she's alive. He's in jail, but she was raped, so she was a little bit of a trauma. So my student had actually felt this attack coming because she was picking up on the information. Now, the interesting thing was, one of the students on the phone was a Canadian from Montreal, and she said, "Is it such and such a hotel, and is it this room number? Because I've stayed there, and I've been in that room, and I've experienced the same thing." So it was not a conscious thing. It wasn't an intelligent, conscious entity. I mean, the guy's in prison. So it's not that. It's that being in the situation, it's almost like virtual reality. And now it's not good virtual reality. You're the victim in that sense.
Do you have a strange story or a survival story that you would like to tell us? Remember, you can remain anonymous. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Just click on that link, fill out the information. You don't even have to have evidence if you don't, because a lot of stuff is anecdotal, happens quick. We don't have time to snap photos or anything like that. So we just want to know what happened to you, your experience, and we may feature it on the show. So clickety-click that link down there. It's so interesting because that's such more nuance than you would get in a lot of places talking about these things.
Yeah.
And it's got to make investigating these things very difficult because you're going in there, and I'm sure you've done it so many times now, it's probably not difficult, but just all the things you have to go through and check first before you get to kind of like any kind of conclusion on the matter. And
well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. We have to interview people. I mean, the whole thing, when I tell my students what the most important tool that they can learn or do, it's not the technology at all. It is interviewing skills, asking questions, listening to the answers.
So can you tell pretty quickly if someone is suffering from mental illness or something to where you're just like, this doesn't seem like there's something objective going on to them? I mean, subjective and objective in this area is kind of like gray. But in terms of like the typical things you would look for, like seeking attention or mental illness or something obvious, have you gotten to the point now where you can tell pretty quickly if that's the case?
Generally, yeah. Not always, but generally. I mean, it's a point. One of the things I can say is that when people have a mental illness, there's a lot more that they describe than what we have seen in the 140 years of our field. I mean, they're describing stuff out of movies, out of fiction, which exaggerates, or they may be coming from a very religious perspective, in which case we have to start asking them questions and see if we can get them off the demonic and maybe into the, yes, it might be harmful or dangerous, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just your fear. But the mental illness thing, there are things that come up. But then again, we often have cases where we have multiple witnesses in the home, and unless it's an environmental thing that's causing some problem for all of them, that would not be a mental illness thing.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm kind of like digging down into like the demonic, the possession, is because we've talked to a lot of people on both sides, and I think I've gone through enough interviews now with people like yourself, and then on the other side, to where I really want to come in to talk to you, as I wanted to get to that point of getting specific responses to those claims, because a lot of times, you just get one side, the other side, and you don't actually put them together. And not to put you on the spot of like, but I feel like you're pretty an honest guy, and you're pretty okay with saying your opinion. So when you get exorcists, and not all, like you said, some refer them to you and understand the complexity of the issue, and it's not just demon. But when you hear them talk about people's eyes changing, and they say that they've witnessed things and people manifesting certain things that are very peculiar and scary, what do you think that is? I mean, do you think there's a little lying going on there? And then I know you to call priests liars, but what do you think's happening there when people and the exorcists are claiming that they've seen these things?
Well, they're first of all, our perceptions are not always accurate, including my own. One of the reasons I got into magic and mentalism is to understand how people perceive things and come to wrong conclusions. And there have been cases where people have been able to evidence changes on their skin, for example. I mean, even with hypnosis, somebody under deep hypnosis, it's possible for the hypnotherapist or hypnotist to tell them that a pencil is red hot, and you touch their skin and they get a blister. So there can be, you think of them, there might be considered psychosomatic physical effects on the skin and other areas. But, I've heard things like their eyes roll up into their heads. Well, people can do that. There are certain things that people can contortions. People can do that. And unconsciously, if there is a problem subconsciously or otherwise psychologically for a person, there are things that people can do that seem to be bizarre and strange. And if you want to interpret that, if they're doing it without realizing it because there's something else going on in them psychologically, then if you're coming from a religious perspective where you believe that anything psychic or paranormal is demonic, then that's what you're going to conclude.
Okay.
So generally, the Catholic Church has generally, things are seeming to change now, but has generally put people through batteries of psychiatric and psychological testing and medical testing before doing an exorcism, before doing any of that. So that's at least taking care. But I've seen some statements recently from a couple of the people who are in the Council of Exorcists that now the Vatican has had a meeting of them recently. And I've heard from somebody who's worked with them, and it's like, yeah, they're very fundamentalist, and none of what they're saying existed before certain changes in the Catholic Church history. So it doesn't come from the Old Testament, for example. It doesn't come from most cultures. There are rituals. There are situations in other cultures where people believe that the gods or spirits have taken over people. And they have their various rituals that are very different, but they don't always call them evil or bad or something else.
So can a human being who's passed away, say that the murderer or the rapist or the evil person who did something passed away, say you're staying in that same house.
Yeah.
Is possession a real thing? Can they get into someone who's living there and cause issues, or at least psychologically? Or is that another kind of thing that's been popularized in movies and TV, and you have not seen evidence of that?
Well, first of all, it really has been popularized by fiction in general. There's very little evidence that serial killers, psychologically disturbed people stick around after death. Very, very, very few cases of murderers who stick around. I think that the a-holes of the world who die and the bullies sometimes do stick around. For the most part, we don't have everybody sticking around as a ghost. Mm-hmm. We'd have a lot more phenomena, a lot more stuff going on, and we don't hear that from the mediums and other folks as well. So that's one thing. For possession, the thing that's important to remember is that people do develop abilities sometimes. We call them mediums because they're an intermediary between us and the spirits, right? And some of them go into an altered state, a deep altered state, and allow the spirit to come in. In other cultures, this will happen during a ritual, a religious ritual or a magic ritual, that the shaman or someone else would allow some entity to come in. That, from an anthropology perspective, and my undergraduate background's in cultural anthropology, looking at the supernatural, from an anthropology perspective, the word possession also refers to a medium allowing a spirit to come in consensually. But when we look at it from the more Catholic, Judeo-Christian labeling, it's like somebody's forcibly taking over your body. And the one thing that I hear consistently from, and I've also seen this in the literature and anthropology from time to time, that if somebody jumps in while you're opening up, it doesn't take any more than you mentally saying, get out, for it to leave. And that's because at least the mediums and these shamans know that living people have more power than the dead. We have more power than ourselves. And this is all coming from their experiential perspective, of course. That's there. But then again, in the 80s, we had this whole phenomena of channeling, where people were supposedly going into altered states and they were channeling ancient Atlanteans and aliens and all sorts of other beings. A lot of that was fraud, obviously. People were all excited. I think the people were more excited about who the entities were than what the advice was that they were giving. Yeah. Because none of the advice I saw was anything more than you would have gotten from a pop psychologist like Dr. Phil. It was barely financial advice. It was just ridiculous stuff. And folks who studied that determined that, number one, you couldn't prove at all that they were who they said they were. I always like to joke that, the entity who said he was from the Pleiades star group was actually an old used car salesman who died in the 40s. And he had a lot to say, but he figured nobody would listen to him unless he pretended to be an alien. But the fact is that some of these people didn't realize that they had some issues psychologically. And think of it, we talk about imposter syndrome sometimes. People feel like they're not really qualified to do what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And this happened, it seems, with some of the channelers, that in their regular jobs or regular lives, they had kind of a form of imposter syndrome. They had stuff to say, but didn't think anybody would listen. And their unconscious mind created these personalities for them. They'd go into these altered states, and the unconscious developed these stories.
That's fascinating.
We worked with a couple people, one of whom was actually coming out with psychic information, and working with her, she realized, wait a minute, this is all me, even though she had 3 different entities coming through. And she became a good psychic.
Wow.
Didn't have to do channeling anymore. We misinterpret, without really diving deep into any individual case, you don't know really what's going on. But I tend to think, from what I've seen, we haven't had a really good non-consensual possession case in parapsychology.
Okay.
That could be because they always go to the church. That could be that. But I have talked to many people who have told me they felt that they themselves were possessed, or that their child was possessed. And if somebody said, I believe I'm being possessed, it's like, well, tell me about that. And there is no description of, like, they're not missing time, except maybe when they go to sleep. They don't change character or personality. I mean, there's nobody speaking through them. It's like, okay, if there is a spirit or anything around you, they're around you, they're not in you. That's different than possession. And then, I hate to say it, but I've gotten a lot of calls, especially when it starts. We see a lot more movies or things about possession and stuff in the news. Over the years, we got calls where I could almost, after a while, say to the person who's calling, okay, it sounds like your child is 14 years old. She's not possessed. She's a teenager. Because the behavior this parent was so concerned about is nothing you don't hear from any parent of a teenager. And, I usually just joke about this. I say all teenagers are possessed.
Yeah, I have 3 little kids, so I'm just kind of waiting for that moment when they all become possessed.
Yeah, don't call me and tell me they're possessed, okay?
Yeah, I mean, Lloyd, it's a problem. I got demons in my house. So for mediums, like, a lot of people try to do it, want to do it, and I think maybe, I don't know if you need training to do it. Is there any danger, and not from putting, like, just totally removing the demonic label, is there any danger for a medium or someone who's not trained or practiced to just start dabbling in that and trying to channel people or trying to invite spirits in? Can you run into a problem that way? Is it not, because everybody feels like they can just go do it. Is that the case, or should people be careful?
People should be careful, but not for the reason that you might think. When you are opening up psychically, which is, mediums are psychic. It's a very specific form of psychic ability. So for anyone who starts having or wants to be more psychic or become a medium, because now they're picking up things themselves, you can be way too open, where if you don't learn how to shut it off, it's possible that you are constantly being bombarded with, if there are spirits around, you're constantly being bombarded with them trying to speak to someone who is alive. Or if you are just simply open psychically, you'll pick up way too much information from everything around you. Could be emotional or otherwise. I've had to work with people who are way too open. I mean, think about being in a crowded restaurant. And normally we can tune our hearing to the person we want to talk to, but technically you're hearing every voice in that restaurant, that crowded noise that's there. And we can, if you think about it, and this is an experiment I tell people to try, stop listening to the person you're at the table with, listen to a person behind you, listen to another room. You'll be able to do that. So imagine if you could not separate a single voice from all the other voices. All the voices are coming at you one time. That's crazy making. That's dangerous for a lot of reasons. So someone who thinks that they're a medium should learn how to turn it on and turn it off, and actually decide when they want to invite someone in or speak to someone and when they don't. And they also need to learn that they have the power. They're in control at that point, no matter how many spirits seem to want to talk to them or talk through them.
Have you ever talked to a medium and they described how the feeling is of turning it on, turning it off? Because I like to equate it to when it's late at night, I've watched a scary movie and I'm moving through my house. I'm just like, man, I don't want to see anything. Don't show me anything. I don't want to see any ghosts.
Right.
Is it a very conscious thing, or is this just an ability that people have and some people have it stronger? Because I've heard before that anybody could learn how to do it, but then I've heard, like, no, you got to have kind of a given talent to do it. How obvious? I would imagine some people have maybe a higher ability or an easier ability to tap into it. What is your experience with that, and how do they describe that ability to turn it on, turn it off?
I have been for over 10 years president of an organization called the Forever Family Foundation, which is an organization that actually does scientific testing of evidential mediums and certifies them when they pass. We support evidential mediums in the family grieving process. In fact, we've got a grief transformation retreat coming up in a couple of weeks here in the Bay Area. With mediums, with a grief counselor, and then also some of us doing more scientific presentations. So I've worked with mediums for the Forever Family Foundation for a while, but I have typically worked with psychics and mediums in my investigative process pretty much since the beginning. since I got started, once I got out of grad school. I worked for almost 20 years with a psychic medium named Annette Martin, who was both psychic, so she could read living people and she could do the mediumship thing. Not every medium can read living people. So it's like art or music. People have an aptitude for certain applications of psychic ability. All mediums are psychic, but not all psychics can do mediumship stuff. And not all mediums certainly most mediums can't read living people. So in working with Annette Martin, we talked a lot about turning it on, turning it off, just generally, because she didn't want to be bothered by spirits at her house and other places. And she said initially, because she grew up being able to do this, initially, she would just tell them to leave her alone, just mentally say, let's leave me alone. But she then realized that she could actually come up with a way to mentally screen herself off and then open the little door to let things in when she wanted to. So for her, it was a very conscious thing to start with, but after a while, it became second nature to the point where generally she was closed off and she would actually have to consciously say, let stuff in right now. And I've heard that with many of the mediums. And in fact, I teach a course in developing your ESP. And one of the things I learned from Annette and from other really major psychics over the years is a technique to screen yourself off and then how to open that up when you want to. It's often called psychic protection. And we've worked with people. One of the people I worked with who was a student was open up psychically, emotionally. She couldn't go shopping at a supermarket because there were too many people around. It just she'd pick up their emotions and stuff from them. So she and her husband would have to go shopping after midnight at a 24-hour supermarket. I worked with her to develop this whole idea of a shielding and then being able to open up when she wanted to. And suddenly she was able to, after practicing this mental thing, was able to go to large groups and do that. But then she ended up working with me on investigations because she knew how to now open it up when she needed to and shut it off when she wanted to.
I don't know if you saw this interview. She was a psychiatrist, still is a psychiatrist, and she lost her husband. She's done some larger podcasts, and she was talking about how she tried to contact her husband after and came to the belief that she could and that she did. And she said she started experiencing things like, I don't know how the terminology, like a voice inside, but things she would normally prescribe medication to her patients for like mental illness. And she was like, man, I think I've screwed up. So how does a medium or anybody with that talent, or if you start developing that, because I had another friend do this too. He did it through meditation. He said there's like a guiding voice now and tells him what to do. And he said the border between like schizophrenia and this is like really a fine line. I don't know if that's true, but how do you parse out mental illness from having this talent? And is there a weird, I guess, crossover between the two? Or can you definitively say, hey, this person through X, Y, and Z is getting objectively, I guess, true information in the sense of contacting other spirits or reading people's emotions?
Well, first, I have to say that, the label of schizophrenia or any mental illness or syndrome or something like that has been placed on people who have psychic experiences, even the most innocuous ones, for a long time. And it's relatively recent in history when the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual, removed one symptom of schizophrenia was listed as having a psychic experience. That would fit us all. I mean, it took a while, more recently, they started considering, there's been research on people who hear music in their heads. We all hear music in our heads. We all have this narration, but that's not, it's amazing how psychology has stigmatized until certain things that if people talked about them, we all have these experiences, which means either we're all mentally ill or this is a normal thing in human behavior, right? We all have a running narration. We all have a voice in our heads. We can all get stuck with that earworm of the music that doesn't go away, which can certainly drive you crazy. So I can't say that there's a fine line between schizophrenia or other mental illness and psychic ability, but even real schizophrenics can be psychic. And there are lots of stories, anecdotes, and even from a couple psychiatrists that I've talked to over the years working in psychiatric facilities where a patient starts talking about things that that seem to be from the minds of the staff, freaking the staff members out, because they're picking up things psychically. They're still schizophrenic, but they are picking things up psychically as well. Being open too much can drive you, make you, I can't say mental illness, but certainly disturb you psychologically for that. So one thing we have to look at is, like, for a medium or someone who believes that they are mediumistic versus they're hearing voices and they think it's, and it may not be from the outside, it may be from the inside. There's a lot of things we have to look at. One of them is, what kind of information are you getting from these voices? Are we able to, with a good medium, this is the testing process too, can we verify that who you're talking to? Can we ID the person you think you're talking to, this image that's there? Or is this something that is seemingly, sometimes people will say, I'm hearing voices, I'm sure it's demonic. And it's like, well, what are they telling you? They're telling me to hurt myself. That's something I would say you need to see a psychologist or psychiatrist for. So it's the messages that they're getting. I've talked to people, we've seen people at our grief transformation retreats. I've talked to people through the Forever Family Foundation, and the mediums have told me about this as well, that there are people, a loved one dies and people may have this voice, hear the voice of someone who passed away. Grief does things to us also. And sometimes it is difficult to determine whether or not this is coming from inside or outside. But one of the things I think it's important to remember is that if you're hearing the voice of a loved one, and you can believe that that's that loved one, as long as that does not become your whole world. This is the problem with mediumship, that the skeptics always say, well, people get addicted to seeing the medium week after week after week. And I can tell you that the mediums I've seen and we work with, ethically, they would never do that with anybody. Never let somebody, and we've seen that at some of our foundation retreats too, where people will go from medium to medium because they're waiting for a specific message from that loved one, which absolves them of something. And they don't hear it from the medium, even though they get valid information, like real information, but they don't hear what they want to hear. And so they go to the next medium. And we can't help those people. I mean, those folks, even psychologists can't help those people. It's kind of an addiction in that way. But every case is different. And just hearing voices or believing that because your husband was a coin collector and suddenly you're seeing coins appear in your house from nowhere, it seems. A skeptic would say, well, you never noticed them lying around before, which I find hard to believe, honestly. But mediums will call those signs. And there may be a situation where that deceased loved one, that deceased spouse, is doing something physical. It's pretty rare, but it does happen for that. And the question we have to ask is, is it harmful for this individual to believe that? There have been clinical studies showing that a good evidential medium working with a psychologist/grief counselor comes to a better outcome for that individual who's grieving than just the grief counselor alone. So bringing in the mediumship piece of it helps them work through their grief. Not everybody, because there's no one size fits all in therapy.
So you would say, so it needs to be a test, basically. Over time, you need to see, like, what is it telling you? Can you verify the information and kind of step by step, and then you can decide? Because I've even seen, and it surprised me, even some priests I talked to, an exorcist, he dropped, and I was really surprised because I didn't know they did this, but they basically have mediums and other people who can spiritually sense stuff working with them. And I was just like, I didn't know you guys did that. And I thought
it's kind of an oxymoron, because since some of the exorcists believe that any psychic ability is the devil or demons pretending to be something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to parse that out with him. I'm like, I thought you guys thought that it was like demonic or it was not a gift but yeah, he basically said, oh no, that you can have a gift from God that was the same thing. It's just that you have to discern where it's coming from. So
it's either a gift from God or a gift from the devil. And most of the time it's a gift from this is what they say, it's most of the time a gift from the devil. So who decides it's a gift from God versus a gift from the devil?
Yeah. I mean, just talking to you is just it's so nuanced. Like just to get through like all the other psychological things that could be going on. It's like, how can you quickly, and to some credit, I know some priests do, like you said, they go through very rigorous psychological tests. So it's not just a boom, but if they're making a shift, then that's kind of concerning.
Yeah. I mean, I like to, when people ask me about demons, I talk about great white sharks, which are predators and are extremely dangerous. So they're kind of the demon of the sea. So if there are demons, take the religious aspect of it. If there are harmful things out there or situations that could be harmful, the question is, how can you avoid them? Not how do you hit them head on? Because you would not typically want to do that with a great white shark. Then again, if you're swimming and you see a fin, there's an assumption most people would make, even if it's a dolphin, because they don't know the difference in the shape of the fin, that it's a shark. But there are sharks that are not predators, certainly are not like nurse sharks are not going to attack us.
Mm-hmm.
There are different sharks, so they're danger. They're predators still. They're just not predators. They're going to attack us. So we would have to look at what that shark is to determine, is this a good shark, a bad shark? What category does it fit in? And even then, it's about behavior. It's about what the messages are. It's about all of that. And for individuals having experiences, if people are not reacting positively, even to having psychic experiences because they're freaking them out, we try to teach them to not have those psychic experiences. And they could be the most innocuous things. They may have nothing to do with anything harmful at all.
If someone's in a bad position, they don't like it. They don't like those things coming in, like the woman who spent the night in the hotel and she was having those same experiences like the haunting replay. Is the only solution to just kind of leave that space, or can you do things? And again, you're kind of referencing like past like religious blessings or whatever else you go through, whatever ritual you're going through to like cleanse that area. Is that a real thing that you notice, or can you, unless you're helping maybe, if it's just a recording looping, do you just have to leave versus maybe a ghost who's hanging around because he wants some kind of validation or help? How do you cleanse an area basically?
So if it's that imprint type of thing, there are techniques that have been used by people all over the world, different cultures. The problem, here in California, a lot of people love to smudge their houses with burning sage because, you've heard that that'll get rid of bad energy.
Yeah.
All that does is makes your house smell, honestly. Because the thing that's missing from that is intention. Every ritual should have a serious intention of what this ritual will do to the space, for example. So I've seen situations where we do use some environmental measurements, which the ghost hunters have used in a completely different way, like looking at electromagnetic fields and things like that. And there have been times that one case in particular we had here in the Bay Area where there was a very negative emotion that was left in this one space. And it was directly related to the previous owner who was being looked at for drug dealing and gun running out of the house. So,
wow.
All of that was, there was bad juju there, you might say.
Yeah.
And the psychic I was working with, she did her own visualization of this. Now, in this space, with the power off, I detected a high electromagnetic field and a couple of other environmental anomalies that didn't make any sense. That doesn't mean the paranormal was causing them. It's just those were there at the same time that people were feeling this stuff. And you might say that maybe those anomalies actually caused people to feel the bad stuff there too, which is possible. So Kathy mentally did, she had this particular visualization of back in the 60s, there was I think it was Ajax, one of those cleansers had white tornadoes cleaning up your house in the commercials. And so she did that. She used the white tornado thing to suck up all that bad energy. And I'm watching like an EMF meter and the readings are going to 0. And I'm watching this other stuff and the readings are going to 0. So something impacted the environment in what she did.
Mm-hmm.
A simple thing people can do, that hotel room, they should have brought somebody in to do something like that. But in all honesty, I told the woman in Montreal, contact the hotel, tell them to move the bed. The odds are they haven't reset the room. And if the bed's in exactly the same spot where the attack happened, you might find other people experiencing that too. But if you just move the bed, that'll move it out of the recording range. There are times that people, yes, you may have to leave, but usually, because I've had a couple of cases where we've told people to leave the property, it was not because of something psychic or paranormal, it was because of something environmental that was causing them to believe it was psychic or paranormal.
You mentioned some of the readings you're getting, and I know with the ghost hunting movies or shows and stuff, they're always referencing all these different gadgets and like things
Yeah.
are going off and haywire and they're all cutaways. And if you know anything about filming and editing, like you're like, okay, well, this could be for any sort of reason that it's going off. But what about the electromagnetic fields, or you can correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, are those spiking because of the activity? And I know it can occur naturally, maybe within the earth or whatever, but are those spiking when people, and is that interacting with people who are open or able to see those things? So if I was standing there, I would see nothing, but someone else like a medium or something would then get some kind of visual or something happening. How is this all interplaying with somebody seeing a spirit or sensing something, a feeling?
So we've been trying to look at environmental settings or environmental situations and how they connect to the paranormal for a long time. The first real instrumentation was done back in the 1960s. The more modern version, what you're seeing on ghost hunting and all that stuff, it's only because the technology has become handheld and cheaper in that respect. We have seen research that shows that the Earth's magnetic field, which none of those gadgets, by the way, pick up directly unless you have a geomagnetometer, because, electromagnetism, think of it as like an AM or FM radio. There's different types of different frequencies that devices pick up, and they don't all pick up all the frequencies. So it's important to have different devices for different things.
Mm-hmm.
The geomagnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field, which does fluctuate, does affect our brains. And there's been research, although it's somewhat controversial because it's not always replicated, that shows when a researcher named Michael Persinger created a helmet to mimic the Earth's magnetic field and changes. And then using that helmet, he was able to cause people to have various kinds of experiences, mystical experiences, almost an alien abduction experience, seeing a tunnel like in a light, having these different visual and other kinds of experiences, which seem to trigger parts of the brain in different ways in different results. But he also found that in our laboratory research in parapsychology, successes and failures or different types of experiences seem to correlate or connect to different changes in the Earth's magnetic field. So the same thing with ghostly experiences, that there were more ghostly experiences reported when there are certain types of geomagnetic fields. And with hauntings. With the residual hauntings, the place memory that was there, I and others, again, it's not always consistent, but we have found that the typical EMF meter, which is used in those TV shows, which is designed to pick up the electromagnetic fields put out by our electricity and technology, by the way. So technically, it's not hard to get a false reading unless you know what's around, or turn the power off in the house, or have a video camera brought close for a close-up to the meter, which then does this to the meter. I had a situation where the actual mic pack that I was wearing when I was doing a TV show was causing problems, depending on which hand I actually had the meter in. So we have to look for all those different things as well. But we found that sometimes, even with the power off, let's say I'm a person who sees that there's this older woman who we find out she used to own the house, and I see her bustling around the kitchen at certain times of day, or I see her coming in the bedroom at certain times of day, and everybody else in the family is seeing her as well. And she does the same thing over and over again. It's that kind of recording thing. And we went into this house. We were able to get permission to turn the power off because we were getting a high magnetic reading in each of those spots. We got it again with the power off. And there was literally no explanation for why that would be. In fact, having talked to environmental physicists, they're kind of, it's like, you shouldn't get that if there's nothing putting out any EM fields, but we still get it. So that seems to indicate that there's something else in the environment that these devices can pick up, not ghostly. They're actually not useful with apparition cases at all. But in these haunting cases, there seems to be something that may affect our brains and the meter and allow us to be more psychic and pick these things up.
Interesting.
But not that, so the field might, I can't say it might be a trigger, but it doesn't actually cause you necessarily, except maybe in some of the geomagnetic cases.
So are all the other tools that we see ghost hunters use, are those bogus, pretty much?
Well, I mean, many of them are being used. The thing is, are they being used for the why they were built? because and some of those devices they're using these days are supposedly built to detect ghosts. That's not possible at our stage of technology and science, period. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what it's made out of. We don't know what a ghost is made out of. We know that they're not electromagnetic in nature, actual apparitions. But they have also used environmental technology like temperature sensor, thermometers and EMF meters and things like that. Those are useful in determining, is the environment changing, or is there something weird about the environment when a person has an experience versus when it doesn't? That's the question. And if there are things happening in the environment when they have the experience, then whatever's causing their experience may cause those unusual readings, or something in the environment's causing them to either be more psychic or to have some sort of other experience.
Is the temperature thing, is that real? I mean, did you see that, or is that just another let's see their breath for the movie?
Okay, well, you're exactly right. That whole thing, that is a bit of pop culture folklore that goes back actually to mediums. Let's face it, we have all experienced a cold chill when there's no cold, right? Something psychological, the hairs on the back of our neck stand up, or suddenly get a cold chill and it's 90 degrees. So that does not mean the physical temperature has changed. And it's extremely rare for actual temperature changes to be sensed or found in any of these cases at all. The whole folklore goes back to movies and to the mediums. The medium said that the spirits, in order to show themselves in a seance, these are, by the way, the phony mediums, because the real mediums never said this. To show themselves in a seance, they will absorb the heat energy from the room, and that allows them to manifest. And in the movies, the early movies, showing the breath and spooky music was better than the person saying, "I sense a ghost." It's a mood enhancer. So it became pop culture folklore that the ghost hunting TV shows have taken on.
Now, is it possible that something could pass through you or interact with you to where it would give you that sensation things are getting colder or hotter or warmer, or changing the temperature when the temperature of the room actually wasn't changing, but like the chills on your back of your neck? I heard you mention one time something passed through you.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
Can that give you these sensations that maybe temperature changes or the chills or the hair stands up?
Yeah, I'd say that, my experience, which was at one of the long-term investigations I had, very friendly ghosts who like to hang around people and party, basically. That's the best way to put it. But who she was, or who she is. For me, because of the way I approach this stuff, any experience I have in a case, to me, is not scary, spooky. It's cool. This is a good thing. So when I first started having this experience, she walked back and forth through me multiple times before. Three psychics were in the restaurant in another room. They came in and they started describing what was going on for me and describe what she looked like and all that. So to me, it felt, because my sensation was she was giggling as she was moving back and forth through me. So that's what it felt like. It felt kind of bubbly and giggly. I can only guess that anyone else who was not prepared for that experience, or didn't believe the ghosts were positive or anything like that, didn't know the story, would have felt, just shaking themselves, either cold or felt scared. And I know that we were on the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum shortly after I started doing investigating with some friends. My wife was with us as well, and she felt someone get a little too close. She's not very psychic, but she did feel like one of the apparitions got too close, and she got very,
Now, those mediums who saw it pass through you, you didn't say anything. They just came and said, "Hey, it's passing through you," and you had that feeling. So you're like, "Oh, wow, that's obviously."
Yeah, they came around the corner, and Annette Martin, who I mentioned already, started laughing and said, "Oh, Loyd, look, she's walking through you." And then the second person said, "I think we're scaring her off because I see that she's moving away." And it did feel like something was moving away from me. And the third one said something as well. I separate the three of them. I asked them to write down what clothing she was wearing, what jewelry, because she changed her clothes. People would see her with different clothing on. How was her hair done, all of that. And I had not seen anything with my eyes at all, but I got a mental picture of her kind of giggling and walking back and forth through me and what she was wearing. And it all matched. Everything matched in that way.
Do you capture this stuff on camera? I think I've heard you reference certain things like doors opening and things moving. What's I guess the most shocking thing, or that I would think is shocking, because most of the stuff you never see on camera, like the ghost adventure show or something, they're like, oh, did you hear that? And the camera's whip and it's pitch black. And I'm like, I can't see anything. Do you catch stuff on camera? Is it still, I know it's not performative. You can't like maybe do it again and it actually does it again.
Well, we ask. Well, first there has to be physical activity, because you're not going to catch any of the psychic stuff, right? So, that same restaurant, the first time we were there was with a Japanese medium for Japanese TV, and had some really interesting stuff go on, including they were adding on another dining room, and they had a push bar door to the outside, which then became the exit later on, but had no handle other than a keyhole on the outside. And I was in the room talking to the crew and to the medium, this is Gibo, and the door opens up. And I thought maybe somebody was outside, maybe somebody from the restaurant. So I went outside. There was nobody there, nobody around. So I closed the door again. Mrs. Gibo, the medium, says, yeah, she opened the door for us just to show us she can do stuff. And I did say, and the director says very clearly, we need to get this on camera. So for Japanese television, they actually got the door opening on its own. I had stationed after that first time, I stationed one of my people outside to make sure that there was no like trickster or prankster outside, and the door opened 4 more times. So that was one thing that happened. Doing a shoot for the Discovery Channel, as it happens, they were interviewing some of the employees at this place, and a bunch of us, including the manager, were in the bar area, and they had 7 Tiffany lamps above the bar, and the 2 end ones had been reported moving. And all of a sudden, this end lamp starts swinging and moving on its own. And we tried to get them to come out with the camera. They were in the middle of an interview. They didn't want to be disturbed. And then they were very mad afterwards, like, can you get the ghost to do it again? I get asked that all the time. It's like, we can try. And we've had other things that had another chandelier start swinging for a TV show, and then at another place, and then when the medium actually started talking to the entity, to the spirit there, it didn't slow down and stop. It actually stopped as if somebody put their hand up to stop it.
Oh,
and that got caught on camera.
And do you have copies of these, or can people find these online, or are these kind of like
they're from Japanese television? I do have. They use some of it, a couple of clips in the Japanese shows. I do have them somewhere. I haven't put them up online, but Tokyo Broadcasting never put, as far as I know, they didn't put the shows up online, and they're all in Japanese. So I have to kind of go through the entire thing to find it.
Oh yeah.
It was like a 2-hour special each time. There is a segment online on my YouTube channel at the Banta Inn, which is one of the places where the chandelier happened, where we were doing something for a show called Beyond Bizarre, and they happened to catch a placemat kind of flipping up with nothing else, none of the other placemats moving, flipping up and then slowly just dropping down. At the same time, they had the camera just turned on, and we were talking in the background. It wasn't even aimed at us. It just was on for kind of B-roll. And there was really bizarre interference on the video at the exact same time that happened. So that was one. And again, this was a place where we had a lot of physical activity as well. And that is in a segment. My YouTube channel for that is youtube.com/Loyd Auerbach.
Okay.
Remembering to spell my name with 1 L. That's important.
Yeah. I kept writing your name down, and I kept putting 2 L's every single time.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Not going to get to my website. Not going to get to anything, other things for me. But yeah, it is there. I mean, it's in the segment. It's, one of the basic problems, I'll tell you, honestly, when we have apparition cases or these kinds of cases where there's physical activity, is the camera pointed in the right direction? That's number one. I've had a number of, because I've done a lot of television over the years, and we've done some videotaping ourselves, of course, and almost always, the stuff is happening behind the camera. A lot of people see it, but the camera's pointed in the wrong direction. And I think that's purposeful for the part of the apparitions.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And it's kind of amusing when that happens, and I've also had a number of directors, producers, cameramen, and other folks experience things. And because the answer I get, you should interview yourselves, talk about this, what you just saw. No, we're the journalists, it's like, you're not a journalist, you're doing a show for, Evening Magazine.
So out of all the cases you've experienced, what is there one particular that's moved you personally, that has affected you in your work, out of all the other stuff you've seen? Because I imagine it runs the gamut of minor to significant, and whether it involves actually physical movement of objects or maybe something personal that you kind of a message you received. What sticks out to you the most over your career?
So the one I talk about the most, because people ask me, what's the thing that might have changed your interpretation or your belief on some of this stuff? I had a case that came to the university when we had our parapsychology program. I was on faculty. It was a family here in the Bay Area that had moved into a house that had been vacant for over a year. The previous owner, who had been born and lived in the house in her entire life, had died in a hospital, but she had only one living relative. They bought it in an estate sale. The living relative was in his 90s in an assisted living facility. And they had individually all seen this woman's ghost since the time they moved in. But a year and a half into this, the mother, the woman actually, her son says something, who was 12 at this time, says something about some of the items they got in the estate sale. And she got very excited, thinking he found some paperwork, and she'd been trying to find anything about these antiques. And he said, "No, Mom, the ghost told me." "What ghost?" she said, because they didn't talk to each other about this. And he said, "The ghost that you, Dad, and Grandma are seeing, but aren't talking about." And she comes to find out that the first time he saw her, he waved at her because she waved at him. And they started an interaction on almost a daily basis. In fact, she said that the boy said, and he told us this again when we saw him, she was helping him with his homework. And oddly enough, his grades had gotten better. So that's a positive for the right kind of ghost. Yeah. In the visit we had with them, we were taken on tour of the house by the boy, his mother, and grandmother. The husband was out of town at the time, but I did talk to him. The kid was seen by a child psychologist first before we went out. The child psychologist, who did not believe in ghosts, didn't disbelieve, but he didn't believe in ghosts. He said, "This is the most mature 12-year-old I think I've had ever in my office. If all of my clients had a ghost like Lois, I'd be out of business." That's what he said. The boy is telling us about, Chris is telling us about the history of the town, which I honestly dismissed, because that was easy for him to look up. Mm-hmm. But then told us family stories. And I was concerned that there was no way for me to know or confirm these family stories until we sat down later on. The mother had been trying to contact the living relative, but the attorney who helped sell the house was kind of blocking because he was in assisted living. So in sitting down, I asked, "How do we get in touch with your cousin, this person?" And I got enough information to be able to contact him. And he confirmed he not only confirmed every one of the family stories, I would start it, he would finish it.
Jeez.
So that was really impressive. The other thing was asking questions that the boy was able to interpret. He was kind of acting like a medium in that sense. Why are you here? Why didn't you move on? How come the family has seen you, in different clothing? The boy has seen you even at different ages. So what are you? And the answers I got from that were very telling, especially from a 12-year-old, because it would have been really hard for him to find any literature that would have given him these ideas. Why she was there was because as she was dying in the hospital of cancer, she did a life review, which many people often do. She realized that she wasn't, she knew she wasn't religious. Her family wasn't religious. She didn't know if there was a heaven or hell. So figured, why take a chance? I just want to go home. She closed her eyes. The next thing she knew was back in the house.
Wow.
What are you? I mean, how come some people can see you and some people not? And she said, and this is almost a direct quote, "As far as I know, I'm just a floating mind, like some of those aliens in Star Trek."
Jeez.
And how I think of myself, the clothing, what age I am, is when people see me, it's what they pick up.
Wow.
So there's nothing visual. It's about a broadcast signal that we are picking up as living people. And she directs that at Chris because that's the relationship she had with him, basically. And then the last thing was on the drive down, we had myself and the two others in the car had a conversation that had nothing to do whatsoever with the paranormal. We had each talked about different things. Does Lois have any questions for us? This is 1985. First question was, do you guys ever use blasters like in Ghostbusters? And I said, no, I kiddingly said, well, those portable particle accelerators, we can't get insurance for them. They leak radiation. So big laugh from everybody. Loyd, what kind of new car do you want to buy? Joanna, do you really want to quit your job in San Francisco? And Kip, how long were you a professional dancer in Hollywood before coming back to school? Because he was out of school. That was our conversation in the car.
Uh-huh.
So short of this kid being incredibly psychic, or short of them bugging my car, and there was no motivation whatsoever for this. This was really a case of, we just want to make sure this kid's going to grow up okay as a teenager talking to a ghost every day. That was the motive for us coming in. And what we got when I said, how does she know to ask us this? How do you know? She didn't trust you guys because, she thought about the blasters from Ghostbusters. Apparently she'd watched TV with Chris and saw a commercial for that. And he had seen Ghostbusters. So she got to the university, got in your car and hitched a ride listening into your conversation in the entire drive. So that plus the follow-up with the relative, plus other just significant follow-up with the family, there was no other explanation for this, to my mind, than this was a real conscious entity.
Because of all the witnesses and everything else.
It's witnesses, it's the information I got, it's that last piece with the questions, all of that.
The afterlife, she wasn't sure. Do you get any other messages, or have mediums told you about any other messages? Because I've gone into NDEs and everything else, and there's that threshold that if you cross it, nobody knows what's beyond that because everybody who's come back actually hasn't gone on. They come back. But when you talk about all these other cases that you've had in seemingly these ghosts not moving on or entities, what message are you getting in terms of what that afterlife could look like? Because I know there's obviously no provable way of saying for sure.
Well, from the ones who are here, they don't know because they haven't been there yet.
Mm.
From the evidential mediums we work with, some of they are talking to spirits who, best way to put it, are projecting back from some other state of existence. In other words, they're not showing up other than to connect, like a long distance Zoom call, like this kind of thing. And what the mediums say is that, there are slightly different, slight variations of this very pleasant afterlife where people make of it what they want. One of the things that I've seen or heard from many of the mediums talking to these spirits on the other side is that when they died, they were put through this full life review. I mean, they had to be confronted by everything good and everything bad they did. So one of the mediums actually said that could be hell for some people. They have to recognize that they did really bad things, and that is hell. That's as far as it goes. One medium said, I can only describe it in human terms, because it's too different otherwise. And I think that is a way, it really makes sense, especially as someone growing up with science fiction. We can only imagine what human creativity and imagination allows us. There can be forms of life out there in the universe, in environments that we don't even think could possibly support life, that could support life, that are more different than we can possibly imagine. And that's kind of a good way to describe it. You're a consciousness without a body, but you still have some sense of identity. What does that mean when there's not a physical universe around? Can you create that reality for yourself? Possibly, and then we hear different things from different mediums. But what's pretty clear is the whole concept of heaven and hell just doesn't work. And that is very much, and we know this historically and doing review of literature and looking cross-culturally, it's not the same in every culture. And the whole idea of this heaven or hell because you did some bad things, it doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah, a lot of the NDE things are very interesting because you do there is some baggage in terms of what people believed and what they take with them and who they think they see, right? It's the light's Jesus or the light's this or that.
Right.
But there is cases like Ibn Alexander described it because it was like a black void was this God entity, and then he came back with ideas of reincarnation. He said things that ran totally counter to his religious upbringing. So there is that sense of, it is interesting to listen to those reports because it does kind of break down the typical heaven, hell typical structure that you hear about.
Yeah, and some people, many people who are very religious who have near-death experience, their religious ideas or beliefs have changed after they have that experience.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, is there a question that you never really get asked too much? And I know you do a lot of interviews, podcast talks. Is there something that people don't ask you that you wish they would, and that you could get some kind of, here's the floor for you to give a statement?
I do get asked this question once. It's a form of this question once in a while is, watching reality TV, what should I believe? And I usually say none of it.
I was going to ask, yeah. So the reality TV is BS then? Is that really quoting? To me, it strikes me as that way.
Yeah, there's so much in those shows. You have to remember those shows are built for ratings. They're built to get people to watch, and they can continue to watch. They're built around the drama of not even this is the thing that really gets me, honestly, the most, is that there have been very few shows that focus on the actual ghost story and let the witnesses tell their story. Some of those ghost hunting shows, they don't even want to talk to the witnesses because that's supposedly anecdotal evidence and that doesn't count. You would not even have a show. You wouldn't even go to that place unless some people had those experiences. So, you don't go to a spooky old place and assume it's haunted, but some ghost hunting groups do, unfortunately. Those shows, I grew up in the TV industry. My dad was a producer for NBC. My uncle was a director for CBS and ABC. One of my brothers works for NBC right now. I've been around television since I had it, even before. Apparently, I was used as a prop in a local talk show when I was 6 months old. So I've been behind the scenes of so much stuff, and then I've worked with a lot of these shows, not so much the reality shows, but it's all directed. There may not be a script. It's called unscripted, but unscripted does not mean that the director doesn't tell people what to say and do. And then there's editing. And they can edit that show in any way or direction that they actually want. Mm-hmm. So if it's a show that has this interpretation that it's all going to be demons, we're going to make it demons. And if it's a show that has some other thing, that they'll do that. And of course, they can cut different things. They might get a reading, an EMF reading in a room that is legitimately explainable, but they cut off the explanation and they move it into a piece where they're experiencing something and they show the EMF meter going haywire. So it's all about editing. It's like even with Real Housewives, I wouldn't trust Real Housewives, as it's not a legitimate thing because they may have an argument and then the director says, "Ooh, that was good. Let's do it again," but yell at each other. And that's how reality TV works.
So watch it for entertainment value. Don't watch it for actual factual.
And don't assume that ghosts only appear at night in the dark, because that is so not true. That is the biggest misconception that these shows have been putting out.
Okay. And if anybody wants to know more about you, your work, where can they find you? Where are the best places to go?
Well, the best place to start is my website, which is www.loydauerbach.com. Again, it's 1L. That's important. There's a link to a lot of media that's up there. I have an FAQ on if you want to learn more about apparitions and hauntings and poltergeists. My books are there. I have a whole bunch of books that are available on Amazon. Actually, many of them are available in most other markets. It's not just the US. And then I also have an every other week podcast called Ask Professor Paranormal, which is linked from the website, my social media. It's just Ask Professor Paranormal is youtube.com/@AskProfessorParanormal. And it's a live Q&A. People ask me all sorts of questions for an hour every other week.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And anytime you want to come back and discuss anything, I know it's a dense topic, so I'll be happy to have you on.
Sounds good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider becoming a member. You get early access to episodes, you get photo evidence of things and cases we're looking into, and you can ask questions of the guests who are about to come on the show. It's a good deal. So click on join in the channel and be part of the Bunker crew. And leave a comment about today's episode. Let us know if Loyd changed your idea of hauntings at all, and if so, what it was. Make sure you timestamp it, and then we'll pick a few out and we'll talk about it next episode. Until next time, have a great rest of your week, and happy Halloween.